Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy has a bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia and a master's degree from North Carolina State University. She works in private practice in Raleigh as a mental health therapist. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010.
This week in the news, you've already got into Yale. Now prepare to be rejected. A great article by Rachel Shin of The Atlantic. You guys are going to love this one.
Friends, I know we said we were going to take the question from Don Trail at Ball State, the student, and we were going to have a double interview in this episode, but a question came in that we felt was very time sensitive from Dale from DC. And he wants to know how admission officers select what high schools they visit and what should a student do on one of these high school visits. Lisa will join me to discuss this question, and I promise you we will have Don Trail's question and how AI impacts future business jobs and the interview with the AI expert Chris Chilbert on Monday's podcast, episode 372.
We have a brand new interview by Rick Clark, the Assistant Vice Provost and Executive Director of Admissions of Georgia Tech, and Brennan Barnard, Director of College Admissions at ConLab Schools. They will be discussing their new book, The Truth About College Admissions, and talking about the controversial topics in the world of college admissions. That is part 1 of 3.
And friends, no college spotlight this week, as we are taking a little bit of a break. It's November 1 is here, but we'll pick up next week with the University of Dayton, as Lisa and Linda will give that for us. Man, my brother from another mother.
Mark, my friend.
Good to see you, man. I had such fun with you in Chicago, man. I kind of wish we had more days to hang.
That's right. And I'll tell everybody, listeners, I'm looking at Mark's face. It's looking healthy. It's looking slim. I think in another 3 years, he might even be able to beat me on the court.
Well, it's better than you telling me. I remember about 6 months ago, dude, you don't look healthy.
Well, that's what brothers are for.
I'm a doctor. I can see these things. You can't fool me. That's the problem when someone's known you all your life, man. You knew when I was flat belly back in the day.
You're making progress, my friend, and the six-pack is there. We just have to rediscover
just
it.
Hidden.
It's a shy six-pack.
There you go.
Come on.
Well, I'm excited about this conversation. Of course, I had to tap into you with the Yale conversation, and we'll mention that a little later. You'll have to give Lauren's commentary. But before we get into that, we have our admissions tip. And I'm going to tell a real story for this admissions tip. It's interesting how the additional information feels like it's changed over the years. And maybe I have a slightly skewed view because I'm working with people and I'm talking about it a lot. And then I also have podcast listeners and they're more knowledgeable. But back in the day, it seemed like nobody knew anything about additional information. Now, I almost get the opposite problem where people are stuffing too much stuff in there. And for those of you who are not following, there's 3 writing sections actually on the Common Application. There's the personal statement, which is your main 650-word narrative, where you get an opportunity to bring yourself to life. There's the community disruption essay, which originally was the COVID essay, but it's been expanded to include things like fires and earthquakes and tornadoes and natural disasters. And then there's this additional information section, this 650-word. You can say anything that you feel has not been conveyed in your admission application. That's not even talking about the custom college-specific questions. So this additional information section, Dave, I was having a real conversation with somebody I'm working with in the Midwest. I was doing a session with the student and their mom. By the way, I'm experimenting letting parents into the writing section, and I'm actually really liking it. It's interesting, but that's another aside. But anyway, so I'm giving feedback, and something's just not sounding right, and I can't put my finger on it. I know, and I feel just really inarticulate because something's troubling me, and I'm just not finding the words to be able to express it. So then the mom says to me, "Do you think it sounds like too much woe is me?" And that was exactly what it was. School, the tip is this: colleges don't like excuses. And so, the first time when you say, you had the low grade because, you were hospitalized and, and really went through some serious health challenges, that's one thing. But the next time when you come around and you say, "I was unable to take this class because it filled up immediately, and if you didn't sign up right away and they gave preference to upperclassmen," and, by the time you're on to sort of your third explanation why something maybe in the transcript doesn't look the way you want it to look, it gives off a woe is me vibe, and it's just not a good vibe. I mean, admission officers would rather you just own it. And I'm just seeing a little, this, Dave, what I talk about on this podcast is what I experience in the counseling room.
Yeah.
That forms all the basis of my content, my ideas. And so I'm just getting a little bit too much woe is me in the additional information section. And my tip is, don't come off like the person that can't own their shortcomings, and there's always an excuse because it's a bad look. And this, Dave, that applies to everything in life, not just admissions.
Yeah. There is a great book out there by a Navy SEAL called Jocko Willink. It's called Extreme Ownership. And basically it says there are no excuses. Every mistake is your mistake. And every challenge is your challenge. And it's all about either you overcome it or you don't.
Wow.
So, to the point, because that's life, guys. That's life.
Well, and I think people respect that too.
Yeah.
They respect that. Everybody knows they fall short. Yeah. By the way, Dave's being a trooper. He just worked the graveyard shift, and he's literally recording from his hospital because you don't know this about Dave, but he's got one of these houses that felt like was built in ancient Rome. It's like so thick that internet doesn't work there barely. So he's using hospital internet. We've been interrupted a few times by doctors and nurses already.
My relief just came. My nurses are like, "Where are you going? The ER is full." I'm like, "Yeah, but no one's dying, and I've got a podcast. Priorities, people.
Exactly.
Priorities."
I love it, man. I love it. All right. The admissions vernacular is going to be a pretty straightforward one. It's probably one everybody could guess just off of the name, and the term is test considered. And it's a term I'm starting to hear some people use. Clemson used it in the information session when I was there last month. Test considered is really the opposite of test optional, right? Test considered. There's also a term out there, test mandatory. So test. We can't get away from it. All right. And as promised, I said I was going to be pulling a lot of these big numbers off of the article Vince and I ran. Colleges spend like there's no tomorrow. These places are just devouring money. And so interesting how they looked and compared the spending from 2002 to 2022 and looked at how the cost of college has risen and all these different terms and different ways it's happened. But one of the things they looked at was what's sometimes referred to as administrative bloat. And they said the University of Florida, more than 50 employees have the title of either director, associate director, or assistant director just in communications. Now, just to put that in perspective, that's more than double how many people had that in 2017. So 50, I guess, is our big number, but talk about expansion. More than double. And so, yeah, the article goes into all the reasons why the cost of college is up. All right, Dave, I'm excited about this article. Why don't you talk about how Lauren figures into it, and then do your your stellar description that we've grown accustomed to, your recap.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
Well, I was shocked when I got this article. I didn't really figure. I was like, I asked Lauren, is this real? And Lauren sort of laughed and says, it's real if you want it to be. And she said that, it appealed to some people and it was real to them, but others figured out long ago that there's so much you can do without getting into this competitive mantra.
Remember, Dave, so far people don't even know what the article is, man. You're going all off like
it's a tease, man.
Okay,
it's called an intro.
I'll let you tease. Go tease.
Tease, okay.
Tease.
Okay, let's get into the article. So here it is. Article, you already got into Yale. Now prepare to be rejected. This is written by a junior at Yale, Rachel Shin. And it starts off saying that Aro Zhang came to Yale last fall eager to try new things. In high school, she had done piano and she had done writing, but at Yale, she envisioned doing all these fancy things like finance and international relations. She was so excited to get involved in Yale's clubs, but she was shocked to find out that a lot of those clubs were competitive. And it says that after more than a month of nonstop auditions, applications, and even tests, this young, bright Yalie who was already in the top 5% of the college admission pool found herself rejected from multiple clubs. And that most of the clubs she was able to get into were ones that she already had previous experience and talent in. And it goes on to say that, quote, Yale's competitive admission clubs include many that are notoriously exclusive, but also more surprising entries, such as community service clubs. One of Zhang's rejections came from the Existential Threats Initiative, which meets to discuss issues such as climate change and AI. Zhang was turned away for not having enough experience dealing with existential threats. Her rejection email encouraged her to listen to more podcasts, such as 80,000 Hours, Tagline, in-depth conversations with the world's most pressing problems. So, Mark, I'm reading this, and I'm actually thinking that this is an Onion article. This must be. But it goes on. Quote, high barriers to entry are no longer just for historically elite groups on campus, like secret societies and the academic group, the Whiffenpoofs, or even for club sports teams. The Investing Club turned away 236 people last year. The Teach Kids to Code Club turned away 20. The Musical Improv Group turned away several dozen, leaving its rejectees to find more loosely organized ways to burst into song. Half, and quote, this is a quote, half of the applicants to the Magic Club saw their hopes vanish into thin air. And I'm thinking at this point, oh, Mark is really spoofing me. He wants But no, it goes on. Yale's hyper-competitive club culture is not unique. At UCLA, application packages for coveted clubs routinely exceed 10 pages and are often the first step in a multi-round process that includes formal interviews and informal coffee talks. All right? The Voyager Consulting Business Club at UC Berkeley receives about 800 to 1,000 applications a cycle and typically accepts 6 or 7. It's way harder to get into Voyager Club than to get into Berkeley.
What were you thinking when you were reading the article at this point, Dave? The world has passed me by and changed.
The world has passed me by. I mean,
well, you had those eating clubs at Princeton, man, back in the day.
We had those eating clubs, but after reading this, I don't feel so bad that I was never called on to be drafted by the NBA. Dang, it's not like you're getting rejected from the existential club. And I can go, the article is more of the same, but
Sure,
essentially it says, quote, Yale is a place where everyone is a winner. Less than 5% of people who apply are offered a spot. You think that this selectivity would make students feel confident and secure. If we had to beat out 95% of our peers to get in, we really must be special. But the opposite appears to be true. Students, and this is the key line, fueled by insecurity, feel the need to over-justify their worthiness, and so they impose endless hierarchies on one another. And that's where this jokingness comes into all sort of seriousness. This is a sickness here, okay? Mm-hmm. And the last thing I want to say is, this goes on for pages, and quote, many, and this is the juniors talking, many of my peers accept the applications and interviews for clubs as the rules of the game they fought so hard to play. They embrace a million micro-meritocracies and believe that if they aren't willing to prove their worth at every turn, they don't deserve full participation in campus life. And so I want to conclude this as, I was thinking, how do we want to address this article? Do I want to take it in the, this is so crazy and so forth, or do I want to take a deeper turn? And I'm thinking, well, I'm looking at the rise of depression on campus. I'm looking at the suicide rate on campus. I'm looking at how so many kids are unhappy, how so many kids are lonely, how there's an epidemic of loneliness and a lack of a social life. I'm looking at the broader implications that we have a society where half the country thinks that the college-going are elitist, aristocratic leaning snobs, and then we have an article on how the top 5% of college seniors by merit feel so insecure that they have to attach a competition and a meritocracy in almost everything they endeavor in order to feel worthwhile. And I'm thinking, Mark, this is some deep problems we're in. I'm going to stop here. And where do you want to take this, my brother? Because
I had three thoughts. I had two, actually, but then you gave me a third. So one of my thoughts has to do with one of the more profound books that I've read is the book Excellent Sheep, and it's by William Dershowitz, who is a Yale professor. And he basically just decries the culture of herding, that's the term sheep, that we have in the most elite selective universities. And he mostly uses Yale, but he also quotes from several of Yale's overlaps. And he talks about how we've moved away from a love of learning and going to college to blow your mind and develop your critical thinking and explore your values. And now all these students talk about all the good they want to do and how they want to change the world in the admission application. As soon as they get in, they try to get into Goldman Sachs or McKinsey or Wall Street jobs and consulting, and it's all about money. And he quotes the statistics of how, disproportionate they are or inordinate they are at places like Yale that are ignoring professions like education and medicine and other things, all because of chasing the opportunity to earn seven figures. And so I thought about that because there's a culture that's part of that, and not just at Yale, it's at University of Georgia and other places where it's ridiculously hard to get into these clubs, and you have to get into the right clubs to get lined up to get the summer jobs, to be on a path to do something like investment banking, private equity, and those, those big paying jobs, or the potential for those big paying jobs. And it's incredible. And I have to admit, I've learned a lot of this from my clients, Dave, who have shared these stories with me about how low the acceptance rates are, and how if you don't get in this club, then you're not on the path. Well, this is who they interview with, and they use the clubs as a screening mechanism, and there's whole underword culture. In fact, at one point I had a student lined up to come on and kind of blow the lid on all this stuff. And then that, make a long story short, that ended up falling through at the last second. I was really disappointed because I thought that was going to make for a fascinating interview. So part of me's thinking about that is how much that culture plays a role, because I see that at other campuses as well. And this underworld culture of you got to get into this club and they're super competitive and all the things you have to do to try to get these plum Wall Street jobs. But the article quotes a lot more clubs other than people that are on a track to head toward Wall Street.
Yeah.
So then I had a second thought. If you heard Evan Mandery's interview, of course, he's the author of the book Poison Ivy, and two degrees from Harvard, undergrad and a law degree, but man, does he pull the hatchet out. He made a really provocative point that I've been thinking about ever since he made it. So one thing you kind of know if you're in education is that spending a couple years in Teach for America is considered really chic and cool. And so many people go do Teach for America. Of course, when I was at KIPP, KIPP and Teach for America are like joined at the hip. I mean, literally, like the leaders are married and they just bring in Teach for America grads like in droves and droves and droves. But the point Mandery makes, and he made it on our podcast, and he also made it in his book. When Lisa interviewed him, he brought this up. He said, I don't think Teach for America would be the hot, attractive opportunity that it has become if they hadn't structured the program to make it so incredibly difficult to get into. And he said it's a shame that they had to create the program and make it super selective and almost add a prestige to it, even if you're going to go, work in a, urban or rural school making next to nothing. You could call it the genius of it, or you could call it the tragedy that in our culture, in order to build that allure, you have to create an aura of selectivity and elitism. And so then I thought about that because I really agree with him. So that was a thought I have. So what if you take that and you apply that concept to almost every other club? What if that's the mindset that we got a collection of driven high achievers, and the way we're going to attract the masses, if we can create this honor in getting in, because that's how you have to play to the psyche of a high achiever that can make it through, the labyrinth of all the hurdles you got to make it through to get into a place like, a Yale and Berkeley and all these other places. So then I had that thought. And then my third thought was the one you brought up, which is our students, and maybe it's an extension of not just students, maybe it extends to other people, administrator, staff. Have they erected these selectivity barriers in a way to make themselves feel good about who they are? And is that sort of sick psychology and some of the stuff that you were talking about? So those are my thoughts. I'd love to know your thoughts on all 3 points, Dave. The Wall Street one, the sort of, Evan Mandery talking about like they realized that they had to make these programs super selective in order to be appealing because that's the way people think it at these schools. And then the third point being this is a way to make yourself feel good, that I'm in a club that's really hard to get in, and that pads my own self-esteem. Thoughts on any or all 3 of those points?
I think all those points are excellent, and the one I'd like to really hook on to is the third one, which is I'm just doing this to make myself feel good, because by excluding other people, it's like elevating myself. I think it feeds to this basic perverse human need to elevate yourself and put other people down, and to stratify society into the haves and have-nots. And I honestly think this is the pernicious thing that's causing the destruction of our society right now. Because when we look at the increased stratification we have socioeconomically, when we look at the transformation of many of our societies of higher education into institutions of elitism and of objects of, quite frankly, derision and hatred on a good portion of the country who sees them as rejecting them. We are institutions of rejection, not in institutions of acceptance. We are institutions of division, not institutions of bringing people together. I see this being reflected in what we're training these kids are to do in these clubs now. It's like we're not having a club to expand and to have as many people as possible so that our stated objective of this institution is that we will get to know other people and get to know other differences. No, we only want the best and the brightest. And we want people to feel that you're part of a luxury group, better than everybody else. And people are attracted to that. And I think it feeds right from the admission process that all these kids are flocking to schools that have these incredibly high rejection rates because they feel if they'll be accepted, it validates them as being better than something else. So I really think it speaks to a fundamental problem, a sickness in human nature that's being reflected in our society, that's being reflected in our institutions and in these clubs. And I see it as a major, major problem.
Well, I had another interesting conversation with this week, podcast listener. And it was pretty obvious that name was going to be extremely important to this family in the colleges that particularly the student was interested in. And at one point I indicated, I'm kind of a little confounded because I'm kind of not sure like what criteria you're using, because I recognize that was going to be extremely important. So I don't like to do this, but I even came with some rankings in their major just as a way of showing them, look, other people think these schools are good. I can't use rankings without having caveats that they're subjective, but individual college major rankings I can stomach easier than the cumulative ones. So I thought I would try that just to try to let the student know that like some of these schools are really good, in your area. And I wasn't getting any enthusiasm there. And so, at one point I said, well, what criteria are you using? Is it like whether your friends have heard of it? Is there some ranking that you're looking at? Because I feel I'm giving you really good schools and I'm not getting any sense of excitement. And then the student said low acceptance rate. So, I just thought about that. If that's the buzz, that's the appeal, if the acceptance rate is low, then I'm going to want it more. There's a human nature to that, which we all potentially can be inflicted by. But boy, when it's taken to an extreme, it's pretty pernicious. I'd be curious. And this is one time, Dave, I feel like I really do wish we had Lauren here. So Dave attempted to recruit Lauren. We thought we had her lined up because she's at, if you're a first time listener, Dave's daughter is at Yale. And so Dave talked to Lauren extensively about this and getting her pulse on things. And we thought we had her lined up until Dave said it's at 8 a.m. The recording is at 8 a.m. I think sleep won out.
Actually, what happened is 15 minutes before the podcast, I gave her a call, and she's like, Dad, where are you calling me? Can you call me tonight? I said, well, I was just hoping maybe can you hop on the podcast with Mark?
That is so Dave to do it 15 minutes before. Let me ask you this. Was this a reminder or was this a first request?
No, it was a reminder.
Okay, all right. I'll cut you a break.
Reminder.
Okay.
But she did allow me to jot some notes down. So she had actually read the article before we did. And I asked her for her thoughts on it. So she laughed. She said, it is true that many of the clubs are very competitive, but she also said that many are not. And it's a choice. And that, in fact, she chose to do things that were non-competitive because, for one, she realized most of the clubs that were competitive she had no interest in. And part of her journey was she took a year off during the pandemic. It was also the year 2016 during the presidential election that we all know that was very
2016, man. You got her in college for 7 years.
No. 2020. And she was very involved in that. During that time, she founded a group called the Young Vote, which was designed to get college students involved in the voting process. And it sort of transformed her from someone involved by research and sciences to someone involved in politics and democracy. And so she's really become an advocate. So I just wanted to list some of the things that she's done at Yale that were not competitive. She became active in the Students for Carbon Dividends, which is an organization for global warming. She wrote for the Yale Politic, which was non-competitive. She was very interested in doing social sciences research. So she said that took a lot of time because she had to contact over 30 professors. But she eventually found a professor that she did internship in, doing research on people's commitment to democracy around the world. She did an internship for the Congressman Roosevelt Delora. And she also got an internship for the U.S. Agency in International Development that looked at, did research on people's involvement in democracy in Myanmar after the coup of 2021. And she also worked for the State Department for the Bahamas on their social media outlet. But the point that I'm trying to make with her was these are things that were all related to what she was interested in terms of the advancement of democracy. None of these things were competitive per se in the sense that you had to apply for them, obviously, but it wasn't like, I'm part of a club. And all of them sort of reflected her greater concern that literally the world is falling apart, and that we need to get people included into things and not excluded into things. And that's been her whole focus. And I think she's had, go ahead.
So Dave, would you say that she looks at this article and thinks, yeah, that's accurate, that's the way it is? Or does it feel like it's, clickbait, exploitive, you use Yale's name and you have something provocative, and here we are talking about it on a podcast, and I'm sure The Atlantic probably got a tremendous amount of reads on it because it's a very enticing title and it's a very sort of scintillating look at a topic that I know we've never had an article discussion on it, and episode 380 or wherever we are these days, can't even keep track. So what were her thoughts? Like, did she think that they captured the culture? I mean, The Atlantic is usually pretty good team of writers.
She said the article was accurate, and they did capture an aspect of Yale that can be very distressing if you let it be.
I get
but
it.
She said that it's a personal choice. It does not have to be. And what she also pointed out was what I pointed out was that your happiness is in your hands. What you choose to make important is what will dictate your life. And if you make a personal choice to make being in a competitive club important to you, then that's going to dominate your life. If you let rejection dominate your life and be the thing that's going to make you unhappy, then that's going to be what you focus on. And she literally said the quote that some kids get it and some kids don't. And it's sort of the key to your happiness. You can make yourself very miserable being rejected, or you can find your own path of inclusivity on multiple levels and ignore it.
I'm having a completely different thought on a completely different subject. Yeah. So I am starting to wonder, and I have a feeling you have some thoughts on this, Dave, but about the wisdom of having a collection of all really high achievers from an academic standpoint, and you impose these really Herculean hoops sometimes that you need to jump through to get through the admission process. I've heard some speakers over the years talk about ability diversity and how important it is just to have like everyday average people as a component of your diversity. And I'm starting to wonder if these uber selective schools are really missing something by not having that. And I'll tell you one thing that gave me this thought. So when I was at Westtown, and Susan will know this because we were colleagues, but we would always have professional development, and we'd bring in these great speakers for the faculty. And one time we brought in Dr. Ed Hallowell. Now, Dr. Ed Hallowell is the head of psychiatry at Harvard. And he mostly came to talk about the book he wrote called The Childhood Roots of Adult Happiness. And without making this all about his book, he basically argues for an anti-pyramid view. He believes our society has a pyramid view where there's only one person at the top. But if we watch how our kids play, most forms of play can be turned into a career. And then you're a winner because you're doing what you love, as opposed to what he experiences at Harvard. He talked about it at length, which is a very oftentimes unhealthy environment where we have kids at Harvard who are in serious psychological counseling because they're not at the top of the class and they feel like they're losers because they're not at the top of the class. And obviously he's in psychiatry, so he experiences that. And so his book is, we got to get away from this there's one winner, this pyramid view, and go to this multiple winners. And you can do that if you'll define happiness in very individual terms. And are you doing what you love? But what are your thoughts on the idea, Dave, that it might not be healthy to not have more sort of ability diversity in the most highly selective schools? If almost everybody is type A driven, there's some downsides to that. And listen, I'm a believer. Listen, most of the people, in fact, I can't even think of anyone I've ever had in all my years doing this that's gone to Yale and didn't have a good experience. So this is not anti-Yale or anti any other elite school, but it's just something that I'm thinking about, percolating out, talking out loud. What do you think?
I think you're onto something. First of all, I look at the experience of Canadian kids and American kids, both in applying to college and being in college, and even European kids. Now, for context, Canada actually has one of the highest percentages of college-educated people, period, exceeding that of the United States. And while going to college it's difficult to get into some colleges, it's nowhere near the competitiveness of the United States, and it's much more accessible. So you get people going to college for much more learning's sake. There's not as much elitism or status consciousness attached to certain colleges. And the end result is that you tend to get a greater proportion of people being generally educated and prepared for multiple fields. I feel that in the United States, we are basically tending towards a technocracy, a meritocratic technocracy, where the high achievers, usually from the highest socioeconomic income levels, are getting all the opportunities educationally, and it's perpetuating these class divisions and exacerbating the income class divide. And we're not bringing people together. And that those people who are getting all the benefits themselves, there's a whole culture of condescension and misunderstanding, which sort of explains part of the blue-red divide we have in this country. So I think there's a lot to be focused on here, and I think it's serious, because I think this is it could be a mechanism that's accelerating the breakdown of our society, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I mean, I don't want to present one side to that. I'm just was thinking of a conversation of someone at Westtown that I got to know quite well in the college process. Susan was in a primary role working with them. The student ended up, they started out at Deep Springs, which is a 2-year school for men in the middle of the desert, and you do manual labor, but the kids are wicked smart, and then you transfer into all these highly selective schools, and the student ended up at Harvard. And I was having a conversation about how they liked it, and they said at first it was very difficult and different, but then everybody's so extraordinary, and after a while you realize that person that you just thought was, your roommate or your hallmate, you find out they've done this absolutely incredible thing, and being around that collection of talent, sort of the rising tide lifts all boats theory was basically what he was arguing. So I just think, I'm here talking out loud. I don't want to sound like I'm anti-elite institutions, because I do believe that being around people that challenge you to be your best self, there's also tremendous merit in that. But, I think there's something to be said for ability diversity. Just like one of the concerns that I have with the most elite schools is, and they're getting better, quite a bit better, but a lot of times you're not exposed to average income kids. And so you really don't know what an average person's life is like socioeconomically. And I don't think that's healthy. Now, I have to give some of these schools are over 20% Pell Grant now. And if you figure 33% of the country's Pell, and some of these schools are over 20% Pell, there are some schools that are making a serious commitment to rectify this, but still a long ways to go when 38 schools have more kids from the top 1% than the bottom 60.
Well, let's bring it home, the take-home points that I got from this article. And the big take-home I talk is kids, please don't take life this seriously. That it's about inclusion and getting to know other people. There are so many barriers out there that are separating us. You've already got into a great college. Don't impose that craziness on yourself to have to apply for clubs that, quite frankly, I'll be honest, Mark, are silly. Are silly.
You're not giving up your right arm to be in the museum club? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
No, the existential club, the magic club, the this club, the that club. Guys, this is not Division 1A football. Keep it real. All right? You're here to meet people and have a good time. Let me say it again. You are here to meet people and have a good time. You are not there to polish up your resume. If that's your reason for going to a club, the problem is you. It's not that club. So kids, chill out. Have a good time. Take the pressure off yourself. There's a reason why so many of y'all are depressed and anxious and pulling out your hairs and so forth, because you don't know how to just have fun. And if I have to give one advice to kids out there, focus more on the fun. And to me, applying for the Magic Club ain't fun.
What if you like magic?
well,
it could be fun if it didn't have a 5% admit rate.
Exactly. or to be or not to be the existential club. Don't have an application for that.
Yeah, I remember one quote in the article. It was some language club. And, they made it so killer hard to get in. And someone said, gee, can't I just get in the language? We expect people to come in and be able to have sophisticated conversations right from the start.
I have to say, when I was in grade school, there was a thing. I was with a group of kids where we looked at those kids. It's like, you know what? I think we're going to beat you up in the playground today.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Okay, Lisa, I know you're back a little bit from your marathon Ohio, Pennsylvania trip. Do you feel fully recovered?
Well, yeah, for the most part. I mean, it was actually, I found the trip to be less strenuous in my day-to-day life, to be honest with you. So it's really just coming back and being behind at home. Yeah, that's the problem that's made me tired. But, all my kids have birthdays in October. All three of them.
I heard about Thomas.
Yeah, that's just a lot. All at once.
That is a lot.
Sonia turns 16, then Thomas is going to turn 12 next week. And Lily turns 21 at the end of the month. If you can believe that. So
you didn't think about that, did you? In the planning.
Very expensive month.
It's also the month before everything's due in admissions.
I know. I mean, I guess if I had really thought, if I'd known I was going to go into this career back in the day, I might have timed things differently.
Who knows? There's a lot of things we would do that for. So listen, before we dive into the Speakpipe question, I'm going to put you on the spot. And if you don't like this, I'll delete it out. So I was thinking about, you had all these great visits to a lot of these schools. And what I'm saying applies to me as well as others on our team. So there's a lot of times when you come back, you've had a great visit, but we've already done a spotlight on it. And we don't necessarily want to do another full spotlight when there's so many colleges we haven't done spotlights on. But what we could do is it's not a spotlight, it's more like a visit report.
Yeah. Well, I actually wrote something for the blog, so I have everything ready to go.
Look at you, ready to go. So
let me just pull up my notes.
There you go. You are so misorganized. I totally see why you were like close to valedictorian status as a student. You and Linda both. You were like so efficient and so organized, both of you.
Well, yeah, I forget things really quickly. So like that's why I wanted to go over and record the date and spotlight with Linda as soon as I got back, because I knew things were going to fall out of my head.
That was smart. We're going to have that coming up right away here. But what I hear is what I'm thinking. Now that you and Linda know how to just go into, Speakpipe, here I go. I got that on my brain. Squadcast and cast your record on your own. I was thinking anywhere from sort of like a, however long you want it to be, 3 to 12-minute monologue, just sharing your thoughts on any of the schools we've already done a spotlight. And some of them, maybe we'll run over like the Christmas, New Year's break to give ourselves a bit of a break when we're traveling then. But I think when you get recent visits, sometimes there's perspective to add, or even if you listen to a spotlighting, you kind of can maybe mention something that wasn't mentioned, or maybe something's new. No obligation. You can pick and choose the ones you want. And I need to do this too. I did those big fly-in programs that I did a bunch of them in a row, right? I did the Colorado fly-in, I did the Pacific Northwest, I did the California one. And the California one, I did detailed spotlights, but I haven't done much on the Pacific Northwest or the Colorado because I'm like, we already did spotlights on them. But I keep thinking about some additional things that were said, and I could go in and record a 3 to 13. Of course, you know me, it's going to be closer to 13 than 3. You know that already. But just give it some thought. I don't know what you think about it initially.
Yeah, I definitely could do Washington and Jefferson because I already have all my notes written.
Yes. At least it came back wanting to do a spotlight of that one. I said, we've already done one. So that I know that one's good to go.
Yeah, so that one I could absolutely do. And then I can, kind of pull some stuff together for Pitt and Carnegie Mellon.
Awesome. That'd be great. There we go. Love it. Yeah, whichever ones you want. So let's transition. The next voice you're going to hear is Dale from DC with a great Speakpipe question.
Hi, Mark. This is Dale in DC, and I have a question for you about high school visits by college recruiters. I see on my daughter's high school calendar that there are quite a few college recruiters coming to visit this time of year, and I'm curious how they select the high schools that they're going to visit and what the expectations are of the recruiters, and what's the best way for students and parents to take advantage of their visits. So any insights on that? Much appreciated. Thank you.
All right, Lisa, you want to start out with any thoughts you want to share, and then I'll chime in with or do you want me to start it? Does it really matter?
No, I just think that, I think high school visits are really important. And at the same time, I notice some students like kind of being resistant to going to them because it seems like they're small, they're going to have to talk to grownups. So one of the things that I'm always doing is like really like, no, you need to go visit that. You need to talk with the admissions officer in that college visit. You need to introduce yourself. He or she's going to be reading your application, and just trying to get kids to be more involved in that process.
Yeah, I really, really, really liked this question for a number of reasons. The first thing that I want to say is absolutely these visits are not arbitrary. In fact, I'll share an actual story, and I'll get real transparent, even with names. So our longtime listeners may remember Tara Kalinison, who came on our podcast. She was a former Smith admission officer and one of my former students and advisees, and so I had her on, and she kind of talked about the admissions cycle, like what's travel season, what's reading season, what's yield season, and then summer doesn't really have a designated name. It's more like miscellaneous season, do a bunch of different things. She kind of walked everybody through the admissions calendar. We did an interview. It was great, sort of me talking to someone I've known now for, 22 years. But one of the things that Tara, I would call Tara when she'd be on the road recruiting for Smith. And I remember once when I called her and she was on the way to Mercersburg, which is a boarding school in central Pennsylvania. And I was saying, Tara, I'm kind of surprised. I said, I wonder if you get a lot of students from Mercersburg, because Smith's quite liberal and Mercersburg within boarding schools is more conservative. And so I was wondering, is that a place where you get a lot of students? And then she rattled the stats off immediately. It was something like, 33 applicants in the last 4 years. 14 admits, Foreign roles. I'm like, wow, like she just had it right there. And I was like, shut me up. You're on your game. But the point is, the reason I shared that story is it is very intentional. It's never arbitrary. So let's talk about who is getting visited. Well, you're getting visited because you're a priority school, because less than 5% of schools are getting visited. In some cases, less than 1 or 2%, depending on the school and its resources. This is a very intentional decision. So then who is prioritized is the question. Well, people that have been sending you students traditionally, you're going to be prioritized because it's just a simple matter of like good return on your investment. You know, I used to be director of recruitment for all of our office. We had 7 people in admissions, and I had to put together a recruitment plan. I was responsible for it. And so, you know, when you do that, you're looking at that type of stuff. You're looking at, okay, in the past, when we went into this school and even this location in this city, like what was the activity? What was the activity from college fairs? What was the activity from either alumni receptions or receptions with consultants or interviews and high school visits? How many people, basically the data that Tara shared is what you look at. Like how many, we even go back to inquiries, landlord applicants. How many inquiries do we get? How many people showed up at the visit? How many, became applicants? The whole admissions funnel. So this is one of the reasons why the most well-resourced schools always get lots of people, because they are such traditional feeders, and it's just going to be a really good return on your investment. The chances that you're going to be able to get inquiries, applicants, admitted applicants, matriculants is really high. And also those schools, they tend to know your school, know your culture. A lot of times they have good college counseling, so they're making matches. But it's just simply, if you're going to justify as an expense, hotel, airfare, rent-a-car, meals, which can be a big expense, especially if people are just flying in for one day and flying back out. That's not usually what you do. Usually come into your territory for a longer period of time, but sometimes that happens. You want to get a good return on your investment, which is one of the reasons why it's been a real challenge for rural schools, because a lot of times with the rural school, an admission officer may see one person, may get to one school for the day or 2 schools, just because of what we used to call in sales windshield time, like how much you're in the car. Where a lot of times, like if you're driving into more city and suburban locations, a lot of times, the admission officer might have a quota of 5 schools. You got to visit 5 schools a day, to justify the investment, not only of the hotel, airfare, rent-a-car, meals, but you're also paying salary and benefits too for everybody. And then there's also opportunity costs. What opportunities are you missing by not going other places? So the first thing I'll say is it's very intentional. It's very thought out. I know when I did it, I used to look at all the data very carefully and make those kinds of, I had to make a recommendation to the director, but the director always approved what I did. So I really kind of was fortunate that way. A couple times maybe get blowback, but mostly not. Most of the blowback I got was what I wanted to take the Bermuda trip, Lisa, because my mom's from Bermuda, and I said I can stay with relatives. And the director's like, "That's okay, I'll take that one."
Oh no!
Well, after 2 years,
what a great idea! I'll do it myself.
It's very common for the Bermudas and Hawaii's plum positions there, but I think after 2 years, she sort of felt guilty because she knew, like. Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent. But anyway, these things are done intentionally. And like I said, it's one of the reasons why some of the rural schools don't see as much. Now, intentional most often is traditional feeder. Like, where are we getting kids? Because it's so easy to justify the return on the investment. Where are we getting good kids, the right kids who are matched? Where are we going to places who will find people who are qualified, people who understand our mission or understand our culture? So that's why it is one of the ways why the more well-resourced schools seem like they get all the goods, because they have people coming from admissions on the other side, and they know these schools, and they have full-time jobs to build relationships with them. But also, it's true for wealthy suburban schools as well. They might not have the same low teacher counseling load, but they still have the kinds of kids that send students there, and they're larger. So you have a better chance of people coming. So the other thing that you'll find with this, besides traditional feeders, is you'll get schools that the college wants to break into. So maybe you're not a traditional feeder, but they see the potential. And I would get that. At KIPP, I would get it both ways. I was also over this at KIPP as well. And so, I would get, you would get the people, we come every year because you constantly get great kids, but then you would also get like, hey, you're a great potential school for us to tap into Georgia. And so those are the two categories: people sending kids and people that have great potential to send kids. And there's a lot of ways you do that research. You're always talking. Sometimes it's just talking with your colleagues. I would talk to admission officers all the time and say, like, where are you getting kids from in this area? And if it was a place we weren't and it wasn't on our travel, then we would add it. A lot of times it's really just that relationship with other people and you're talking to peers with your relationships. So that's that part of it. And then as far as Dale also asked, so that's really the question of how do they select? And then what are the expectations on the part of recruiters? Well, one of the expectations is that you come prepared. And, when I was working at KIPP, I was just absolutely mortified when I first started because some of the kids would be so completely unprepared. Lisa, I got to tell you this. This question is so embarrassing. And this was about 8 years ago, maybe now, that I feel like I'm going to shrink in my chair telling it because I'm going to relive it. So the student showed up at a session because, a lot of these times you're during class, a lot of times, right? You got to get permission, break away from class. You'll never guess the question the student asks. I can't, I'm not even going to ask you to guess. So the student gets there and the question he asks is, what school are you from?
Well, it's a legitimate question, but it could have probably looked at the, literature that's around or whatever.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So it's an expectation that you are being selected by a student because they have interest. It's an expectation that you've done at least a little bit of research on them. I mean, one of the biggest ways to impress an admission officer is with great questions. And you can do that at information sessions. You can do it at fairs. One of the ways to not impress is to ask questions. And we used to use the term 3 clicks of a mouse. If you can click and get the answer with 3 clicks, it's not a good question. So you're expected to come. Okay, with dress, that's going to completely vary. You're not expected to be wearing like tuxes and 3-piece suits and dresses and all that. Like some of that varies a little bit on the culture of your school, but you're not expected to dress up. You just be presentable. But you're expected to not be on your phone. You're expected to have eye contact and not be a bump on the log. And I used to travel around and do, and of course, this is a big thing you do when you're on the road traveling, is you go and you do these sessions. And I called them group interviews, even that they really that's a very sort of informal thing, right? So you would talk with the placement director and talk about your school. They would put together a group of people that match the interest and the academic criteria of your school. And then you come in and you do a presentation. And then oftentimes you meet with the placement person and you have dialogue and have conversation. I did that both at the boarding school level. Susan let me do this a lot of times at Westtown. I would do it. And afterward, a lot of times the admission person would say, tell me more about that guy that had the Philadelphia Eagles jersey on, and I would do the same thing. So I've seen it both as a recipient on, with colleges visiting, and I've been the coordinator, and I've also seen it when I was on the road recruiting, and certain people stand out and other people don't stand out. And you would jot down little notes if somebody stood out. And so how do you stand out? You stand out by being attentive, engaged, good manners, and asking great questions. Not dominating the conversation, but not being invisible either. Because everybody wants that spark plug for conversation that's going to strengthen the academic environment for everybody. And so it's sort of like a simulated environment. So if you come in and you say absolutely nothing, the implication I'm going to get is, oh, you're the person that just doesn't contribute at all. If you come in and you just dominate, you don't let everybody else get a question in, then that gives a certain perception of how you'll be in a class. But if you sort of have the right appropriateness, and how many questions that is, I can't tell you, because this could literally be 2 or 3 people, or it could be 30, like the size varies, right? Tremendously how many people come. But, and then I always tell people, like, go up, shake people's hands, smile, eye contact, and then follow up with a good thank you email. Those are just basic etiquette things that are kind of good to do. So okay, we answered most of Dale's questions. How do they select? What are the expectations of recruiters? And what is the best way to take advantage? The best way to take advantage is to really do your homework on the schools and come in and pick schools that you're interested in and ones that are sort of around at least you're competitive academically with. Some schools have policies that you need to get permission, especially if you're missing school for that kind of thing. And then be engaged with great questions and then follow up. It's also a good idea if they have business cards or whatever to get that. And, depending on the size of the school, you might have some ongoing communication. You don't want to like bombard them, but maybe it's just maybe 4 to 6 months later, you have an email. I remembered your session was really great. I've been researching, have been able to finance information on blah, blah, blah. That kind of thing can be appropriate. Any thoughts, Lisa? I feel like I'm treating you like Vanna over here. I feel like I'm not being interactive. Okay.
So I guess, I think that's the thing, like kids really need to go and try to be prepared. So don't go and be on your phone all the time. It's probably better to not go if that's going to be your attitude than to go and make a bad impression.
I would agree.
What about the kid who, let's say they have like a calculus test and they can't go,
great question.
And it's a school that they're really interested in? Would you recommend they maybe email the person and say, hey, I'm really sorry I missed this. I had to take my calculus test. I'd love to hear more about your school.
I'm really glad you brought that up because that's a great question, because for some schools, they will see not showing up as a sign of disinterest. It came right into your living room hearing you never showed up. Other schools are more conscious of, hey, how do we know the student didn't have a conflict or whatever? But it never hurts to do that. You could either do the email. The other thing that people used to do all the time, this is for college stuff in the South Room at Westtown when I was working with Susan. They would come and they would show up a few minutes before, just shake the person's hand and say, listen, I'd love to be here, but I have a conflict. But I just want you to know, love your school. Got a visit plan coming up. I'll be, whatever. Just that, also can be good. Of course, you might not even have time to do that. But either way, it is good to notify the officer. Because the other thing to keep in mind is, most of the time, the person that's being dispatched is the territory manager, is the regional admission officer, which means they're going to be reading your file. And not only are they going to be reading your file, but a lot of times within the office, there's an element of deference that's given to this person because you're seen as the expert on the school. You probably know the school better than anybody else. You may have met the kid maybe multiple times. Sometimes you meet kids multiple times because you'll meet them on a school visit, then you'll come by your table at a fair. So you might have interacted with the same student multiple times. You may have talked to the school counselor, depending on how long you've been around. You might have been working with the school for 5, 7, 10, 15, who knows how many years. So there's a degree of deference within the office. And a lot of times, everybody has their own opinion. And in most admission situations, more than one person's reading a file. Of course, every situation is different. We can name schools where the territory manager just auto admits. But even if it is one person, then if it's not multiple people, it's usually the territory manager that makes a decision, and then maybe like a higher level person might have to sign off on it. So either way, this is an influential person in whether or not you're going to be admitted as well. So yeah, great question. I think we covered it. Anything else? You think that's good? All right.
I think it's good.
All right. Bringing me back to my old days on the road. This question fired me up.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, this is one of my favorite interviews I've done. I didn't realize how much I liked it until I was editing it. I did it from a hotel in Clemson, South Carolina. Third time we're having Rick Clark and Brennan Barnard on the podcast. And in part 1 of 3, Rick and Brennan tell us about their bios. Rick and Brennan also talk about why they wrote a new addition to their book, The Truth About College Admissions. And Rick and Brennan share an issue or two where they disagree, because Brennan is primarily sending kids to college, so he comes from that perspective, and Rick is primarily receiving kids. So they come from opposite sides of the desk, and they open up about a couple issues where they disagree. It's a great interview, in my opinion. Listen and enjoy. Friends, you're in for a treat today. We have 2 three-peat guests who are back, Rick Clark and Brennan Barnard. Hi, guys.
Mark, how are you?
Hey, Mark.
Well, I know that a lot of our listeners know who you are, but I never want to assume everybody does. So why don't you each do a little brief intro?
Sure, I'll start. I'm Rick Clark. I am the AVP and Executive Director of Undergrad Admission at Georgia Tech, and glad to be with you.
And I'm Brennan Barnard. I'm the Director of College Counseling for the Con Schools Network and also the College Admission Program Advisor for the Making Caring Common project at Harvard Grad School of Education. And I also work with the College Guidance Network as the Director of College Counseling there.
Both these guys wear even more hats than that, but we could take up the whole rest of the time with them giving their bio, which we won't do today. But just by way of background, Brennan was on in year one, toward the end of year one. I did an interview with Brennan where we talked about common mistakes parents make in the process. Remember that, Brennan?
Yep. They're still making them. And I'm one of them, and I'm making them as well. So my daughter's a senior in high school.
Hey, you're right in the mix. So we encourage you to go back and do that. And then maybe 6 months or so after that, on episode 50, Rick, we did a series on what's the right way to handle an acceptance, the right way to handle a denial, deferral, and wait lists. Like, there's a way to do it graciously, and there's a way to be a jerk. And so we encourage you to go back into the archives on that. And then on episode 100, they both came together, and I interviewed both of them on at that time, their new book. And so why don't we pick up from there, talk about the original book and the new book, and why don't you kind of talk about, like, let's just start with why you wrote the new one.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of came around. It was time for a second edition. A lot had happened. We had had a whole pandemic and a bunch of other stuff going on in college admission since we had written the first book. And I mean, everything from we wrote the first book in 2019, so everything from the Varsity Blues scandal to a pandemic to lots of different SCOTUS cases and all kinds of things had happened. And so just felt like the right time to update it and provide some updated guidance and talk with families about, more and different issues.
Yeah. The only thing I'd add is we added a new chapter, a lot of new content throughout, and we kind of divided it up differently. I think the first book had 10 chapters, and this one either has 13 or 14. So we've segmented it out differently. But one entirely new chapter is around conversations about paying for college. We had that interspersed throughout the book, and that still is true. But we wanted to just really set aside some real space and time in this one to facilitate those conversations. I mean, we understand that there's good resources out there and we can't answer everybody's exact situation, but what we can do is give people some rails to run on. And, honestly, that's kind of what the book has been and is again in this edition, is facilitating healthy conversations, which I know is one of your goals on the podcast, and giving people things to think about, questions to ask, and ways to maybe approach things differently. And that's really one of the big goals for the book in general, but definitely for that chapter.
Yeah, as Rick said, our goal here is making college knowledge available to all. So this fits right in with our mission. And I'm gonna put my hat on now, like I'm Johns Hopkins Press. And you guys have mentioned the book, but you haven't even said a name. And so, what was the name of the first one? What's the name of the new one? And when is it available? And where?
It is available now. We published it. It was released last week, and it's the same as the original book. It's The Truth About College Admission: A Family Guide to Getting In and Staying Together, the second edition. And in between these two editions, we did a workbook. So it was a companion guide, a workbook to with exercises and activities and things like that families could engage in, kind of matched chapter to chapter with the original book. And I'll just say, I mean, another thing we've done with this updated book is at the end of each chapter, you'll find a QR code. And if you scan the QR code, it takes you to our website, and we have a chapter by chapter resource guide of, again, activities you can do, YouTube, TED Talks, and things like that to watch, and just some bonus content.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
You were talking, Mark, about speaking with Ron Lieber recently, on the podcast. And like, I know one of our resources is something that he put out. And we again, it's like, you can't get everything into a book, but
sure.
if you can find a way to springboard people off to other resources, that I think we did a better job this time with that. It was there in the first book, but this time we found some more creative ways to consolidate and help people find those resources.
And we're also hedging our bets a little, because we knew that, I mean, the pace of change in college admission, I mean, it's the one constant, right, in college admission is change. And so we knew that by the time it published, we were writing this updating it like 6 months ago, and by the time it published, we knew a lot would have changed. I mean, AI, for example, but so there's a whole QR code that will take you some updated information on AI and things like that. So just felt like the right thing to do.
And will the website, is that something that you can update as new things emerge?
Absolutely, and we can share that with you so you can put it in the show notes.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important. I mean, that's always a challenge of a book. You know, you guys know I have a book. You guys both have a copy of my book.
One thing I can just add something to that.
Sure.
And the website is also just truthaboutcollegeadmission.com. Like Brennan said, happy to give you that to put in the show notes. But, you know, in addition to the resources, we also link there to our podcast, to the books and the workbook. Brennan and I have been out around the country doing some talks, to school communities. It's been really interesting to integrate some of the exercises and that kind of thing from the workbook in particular to doing like teacher letter writing and counselor letter writing workshops to kind of do like a broad admission talk together. And it's been fun because when we wrote the book, it was cool to talk from both sides of the desk. And I find that, presenting with Brennan's always fun too, because we can kind of go back and forth on some things. Sometimes some good natured ribbing, and then other times just telling a more complete story. And I think that that's ultimately the goal.
Yeah, and if people miss that, I mean, one thing that's really unique about this book is, you have two gentlemen here with 25 plus years of experience, but most of it being on other different sides of the desk, right? So Brennan is sending, and Rick is receiving, and so we talk about diversity of thought, like you're getting the perspective, oftentimes the same, sometimes different, and I think that's one thing that makes your book stand out different than some of the other books in the market. I mean, two seasoned vets, but coming from different angles. And then, you guys have a level of transparency and candor in your conversations. I mean, we took up for once our in the news, the article that you wrote on should you request mail or not get it. And we saw you guys did that whole both sides thing. And do you guys do some of that in the book as well or not?
A little bit. Not so much the like kind of poking fun at each other back and forth stuff, but I think there are a couple places here and there where there's like, coming at different angles.
But we definitely do that in our presentations. And I mean, when Rick and I get together, we often go for a run or go for a hike or do something, and always the conversation turns to something we wish was different, right? And
Sure.
From our unique perspectives, and I think we can challenge each other and also kind of support each other in those ways.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
This is Linda, and today I have two recommended resources, and these were suggested by a fellow college coach to help students find inspiration as they work on their personal statement essays. First is the website The Moth. Here you can listen to short narratives that provide students with ideas of how stories can immediately grab a reader's attention. The Moth also has a podcast and live storytelling events, and you can even submit your own story, and they might air it on the Moth Radio Hour. The other website is This I Believe, which is a nonprofit organization meant to engage people in writing, sharing, and discussing essays about the core values that guide their daily lives. This, I Believe, was originally a radio program hosted by Edward R. Murrow in the 1950s, and he had people share their personal motivation in life. The latest iteration of the organization is a website that features essays each week, and you can also search by subject, and there are thousands of essays to read, including some from the 1950s eras. Instead of looking only at examples of college essays that worked, the hope is that students will take inspiration from these stories and essays that speak to them, and they'll recognize methods for engaging readers in a compelling way. The Moth can be found at themoth.com, and This I Believe is at thisibelieve.org.
So I'm going to put you on the spot. I think it'll be interesting to our listeners. What's an issue or two where you feel you have a different perspective, and maybe part of it is, Brennan, you see, you're in the world of seeing kids and what they're aspiring to, and Rick, you're in the world of receiving and also having business demands that you have to fulfill. And so I'd love to hear, obviously we talked about one already. Should you request mail? Is it good to get all this mail versus not good? Anything else come to mind?
I'll tell you one, and certainly Brennan, we'll talk about this, but in general, people from the secondary side also will speak to this. And the idea of, in our mind, from the higher ed side, everything is evaporating. And people just want us, it seems, to make decisions based on what they want to give us or nothing. With test scores going away largely through test optional, with many schools moving to mastery-based transcripts, of which, Brennan certainly represents one of those schools, or narratives, with people saying that there are, and I don't disagree, equity issues around letters of recommendation or the ability for students to get help with their writing. If it were up to, it seems sometimes, people on the secondary side, we would just get a name and have to make a decision. And so we kind of joke a little bit about that. And even as I say that, it's I can understand. I mean, he has helped me understand all of that from the secondary side, but it's also when I'm sitting here with goals and I'm sitting here with a charge to bring in a certain number and sub demographics and all of this, that's not really helpful or realistic. And so I don't want to be, this sort of demagogue that's, trying to dictate all the gauntlet of things a kid has to do. But at the same time, I need something to make a decision with.
Right.
What do you want to add to that, Brennan?
Well, I mean, yes, he's exactly right. And there's a lot that, I think students are asked to do in terms of the SRARs, the self-reported academic records and things like that are just kind of add-ons in the eyes of some students and the eyes of some counselors. But I'm able, because I've done admission myself and because of our conversations with Rick, I get the pressures they're under and how that plays out. I mean, the same thing with another thing we kind of go back and forth on is early decision and early action, right?
Yeah. Talk to us about that. Where's the disagreement or different perspectives there on that one?
Well, just that developmentally, it's not that appropriate for a lot of high school students, and there's a lot of pressures that early action, early decision force onto students to make decisions earlier and kind of amplify the process, and kind of a lot of gamification of college admission. At the same time, I also get the higher ed's a business, and right, and they are facing really challenging staffing issues and things like that. And part of it is just kind of spreading out the applications throughout the year. And so, I mean, some of those intricacies of why they have policies have become apparent through our conversations. I still don't have to like it, and I still don't like the impact on students, but I get it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from the ED side of things, it's exactly what he said. I mean, we have to spread some of this out. I mean, just from a logistical standpoint, if we want to run a holistic process, look, if you're okay with us just putting numbers on a spreadsheet and drawing a line, we can do that really quickly. But the demand is that we're making nuanced, contextual, holistic decisions, and that takes time. And so spreading it out, and then of course, Georgia Tech doesn't have to be an early decision school, but many are. And I think sometimes there's a little bit of a Pollyanna view on this, because you're locking in a higher percentage of your students early, and they do disproportionately represent a pretty high, socioeconomic strata. But that also gives you the confidence to put out dollars later in order to achieve some of those other goals of socioeconomic diversity and other institutional priorities, right? And so, I live in this world too. I think sometimes that parents and people that criticize higher education a lot think that we just live in the office and don't actually have our own kids and go to the swimming pool and talk to people in the neighborhood. I mean, I don't love it either that too many kids feel pressured to pick something early, but I also understand on this side why the business and why the sort of I'm trying to think of the other day. There was a word. There was like a phrase going through my head, but it was just basically like the tyranny of the timeline, and that is continually compressed by number of applications, by limited number of staff, by the fact that kids often wait till the deadline to apply, by the fact that you've got to put decisions out to be competitive with the other schools that are in the ecosystem. We don't operate in a vacuum. So that tyranny of the timeline is a reality, and it leads to these kind of things, which by no means are perfect, nor how we would design them if we were left on our own.
That was well said. And for those of you who didn't follow, some people think that, financial aid dollars strictly come from endowment or people that donate exclusively for aid, but financial aid dollars come from the operating budget. The operating budget is oftentimes fueled by tuition-paying parents. So Rick was referring to the fact that some of the dollars that come in from an ED full paid commit help to fuel your diversity and your socioeconomic diversity. And so that's the other side of the nuance. Friends, this concludes the first part of my interview with Rick Clark and Brennan Barnard. I hope you'll join us next week for part 2 of 3.
On Monday's episode, Mark is going to explain what we can learn from NACAC's recent survey that admission officers completed about what factors most influence whether a student is admitted. Our question from a listener is from Don Trell, a current sophomore at Ball State in Muncie, Indiana. He says he is a business major and he wants to know how AI is going to impact business majors. We have a special guest, an AI expert named Chris Chilbert, who works for the federal government, and he is going to answer this question over the next 2 weeks. And we will have the final part of Dr. Lisa Ruff's interview with Dr. Eric Newbill, the Associate Vice Chancellor at East Carolina, and they will discuss the relationship between student engagement in college and student success in college.
And friends, remember, college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. See you on Monday, friends.
Take care. Amen.
Hey, Dave, we got a letter from somebody from Branksome Hall. You remember that school? It brought back memories.
Yes.
Brought back memories of me hanging out with you and Favergale and all your private school Toronto people, podcast listeners. So shout out to our Canadian listeners in Toronto. We're happy to have you on board.
I remember dating someone from Branksome.
We'll have to save that story for next one, man. We'll leave a cliffhanger. All right, see you, Dave.
Take care.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stelianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.